On today's World Insight, U.S. foreign policy priorities outlined in the new American president's speech on his first visit to the State Department. What do they mean for China and the rest of the world? And double whammy for global businesses, a crushing pandemic, and contentious China-U.S. relations. Hope for the best, but how are they preparing for the worst? Words of wisdom from the chairman of a prominent consulting firm.
The advice we give to business is to make sure that you plan accordingly to work in both systems, that you actually are scenario planning for all different possibilities.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight on CGTN. We start today's program in the United States, where U.S. President Joe Biden delivered his first foreign policy speech more than 2 weeks after taking office. In the wide-ranging address, he touched on various issues, including relations with Yemen, Russia, Myanmar, and of course, China. Mr. Biden underscored the message that, quote, America is back. That is the slogan indeed. And diplomacy is back at the center. That is a slogan as well, as he outlined some of his foreign policy priorities. He did mention an intertwined approach to matters of domestic and foreign concern.
There's no longer a bright line between foreign and domestic policy.
For the latest analysis with different views, we are joined in different parts of the world. Chapel Hill in the U.S., Klaus Laris, Distinguished Professor of History and International Affairs from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's been doing research about cross-Atlantic relations for decades. Thank you, sir. In Memphis in the U.S., Joseph Gregory Mahoney, Professor of Politics with East China Normal University. Now he's living in the United States. Last but not least, in Beijing via Skype, Yuan Peng, President of China Institutes of Contemporary International Relations. That's one of the most well-established think tanks in China. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Well, the slogan is very clear. The United States is back. Is back to what extent? For example, about the global fight against the COVID-19, which is the biggest challenge. Mr. Laris, are you satisfied with the answer given by President Biden?
Well, he gave a very wide-ranging speech, and I think it was a good beginning. What he wanted to imply was really that America was going back to normalcy. He wanted to indicate that the Trump administration and that disengagement from the world and disengagement from America's allies was not normal, that he would go back to what America was typical like in foreign policy terms. So engagement with allies, but also engagement with rivals and competitors. He wanted to indicate America will engage again, and America wants to lead again in international relations.
It wants to lead. Will others really believe in it and trust it? Professor Mahoney, your general impression of the speech?
My general impression was that he is trying to reestablish diplomacy, reestablish protocol, fulfill some of his early campaign promises with regard to the Paris Agreement and returning to the World Health Organization. I think that what we're seeing is a move towards something that was familiar to us in the Obama years, sort of a principles-based pragmatism. But I don't think that anyone's under the illusion that we can really just go back in time and that everything's going to go back to normal, despite the fact that everyone feels like the last 4 years has been sort of a bad dream, Trump plus the pandemic.
Quite some corrections, obviously, President Biden is trying to do compared to his predecessor over the past 4 years. Principled pragmatism, is that what Mr. Mahoney just said? Professor Yuan sounds echoing in your words. What's your general impression?
To be frank, I think this speech just delivered by Joe Biden not as impressive as I expected.
Wow, what was your expectation?
it's not so long, it's not so comprehensive, not so systematic. Some hotspot issues like Iranian nuclear issues, North Korean nuclear issues, didn't mention at all. But still, I think one slogan is well received. That is, American is back. Back to what? Sharp comparison to Donald Trump, who pursued American first, and no interested to being a vital role in the world platform and isolationism unilaterally. Now Joe Biden slogan is American back. Back to what? Back to the world leadership role, just like Americans playing in past century. I think this is a core message that he delivered to the whole world.
We've seen some quite diplomatic interactions, in fact, gentlemen, over the past 2 weeks since the new administration sworn in. For example, phone calls between the president and his counterparts in Canada, Mexico, France, NATO, Australia, Japan, South Korea, and also including the meetings between the Secretary of State and the foreign ministers of some of these countries, to say the least. These kinds of meetings, will they really establish trust or regain trust? Or it's only the very, very beginning? Professor Lowry.
Yeah, it's the very beginning, and it's only polite to call up your allies and friends and talk to them first, and then to talk to other people. He talked to the German Chancellor, to the French President, the British Prime Minister, leaders from Mexico, South Korea, but he also talked to the Russian President Putin, and apparently it was a very tough talk, and Biden made clear to him that America was not a pushover, and that he very much criticized the Navalny affair, that he criticized many other things, but he also showed an interest in engaging with Russia by, for example, extending the New START treaty, which has just happened. So I think on the whole that was what can be expected, because Biden said during the election campaign he would be tough on Russia, but he also wants to engage. And of course he wants to continue engaging with the allies, and there's a lot to do regarding transatlantic relations. You know, transatlantic relations during the Trump administration declined a lot, and here Biden does need to rebuild trust and to open up again to the wider world. And I think that was a beginning, and I'm sure he will continue that. Regarding China, by the way, there wasn't that
I'm not
much
asking China yet. I just want to have this
speech,
yet.
But
let's just focus on besides China. We're going to go there, gentlemen. Another thing is, what does it take, Professor Mahoney, do you think, that the allies would come back to the trust of the United States? After all, there is still the issue that 4 years from now, we don't know what's going to happen in the U.S. All the policies have been turned over the past 2 weeks might come back again. Or is that a scenario?
Yeah, that's really a problem. You know, the United States is, as everyone knows, it's highly polarized. You know, if Biden is not successful, or if the country at large, or if there are just broader issues and COVID's not under control, if we don't have a firm economic recovery, if we don't have more support leaning in the direction of one party versus another, the Democrats are going to lose the midterms, potentially lose both houses. The margins are that close, the House and the Senate. And, you know, we could be tipping towards more dysfunction and the return of people who, like Pompeo or Pence, who take a very different view, right? And you know, right now we see that you know, Trump spent his 4 years in office reversing almost everything Obama touched, and we see in the first few days Biden reversing everything that Trump touched. And so I think it's really difficult for people at this point to know not just what Biden is going to do, but what he's going to be able to sustain. And we've seen in the past, we saw, for example, with Clinton, where he had that tremendous loss in the midterms in his first term, where he really shifted tactics. And I think that's the big problem right now for anyone who's looking at the United States and looking at the United States relative to other countries that have more stable political systems.
We'll see what's going to happen. But of course, there's the elephant in the room that we really need to mention. That is the relationship between the United States and China. In his first foreign policy speech, Mr. Biden minced no words about China-U.S. competition. Take a look at this.
take on directly the challenges posed by our prosperity, security, and democratic values by our most serious competitor, China.
We did notice that he's using the word competitor. Also in his speech, Mr. Biden said that his administration is ready to work with Beijing when it's in America's interest to do so. Now, Professor Yuan Peng, you've been doing research about China-U.S. relations for decades, preparing so much about what's likely to be the scenarios. Tell me your response toward these words.
Yes, I've noticed that Joe Biden intentionally, very carefully, and smartly use this term, that is competitor, but add some adjective that is the most serious competitor. On the one hand, want to make difference from Donald Trump, who view China as a rivalry, adversary, or some like Mike Pompeo even called China enemy. So Joe Biden is different, use a competitor, challenging rather than threat. But on the other hand, based on it's now very bad domestic political phenomena, we call China as the most serious competitor. So how to balance competitor domestically and to improve the relations in the future? I think Joe Biden is very smartly used this term. But from this, I can see that Biden's term leave us some expectations for the future U.S. and China relations, which both countries can play in the near future.
Very interesting. You see space among the words that he used that could be common ground established possibly in the future. That's a good way of looking at it. In response to that, the response of U.S. President foreign policy speech, the Chinese Foreign Ministry says it seeks to work with Washington for better relations. Here's a quote of that.
We hope that the U.S. will follow the public opinion of the two countries and the trend of the times, to look at China and bilateral relations in an objective and rational manner.
That's a response coming from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Professor Mahoney, your take.
Well, you know, I think that there is a lot of opportunity for cooperation, and I do think that this was. I agree with you, Yuan Laoshi, that the speech was very thin. It wasn't long on substance, other than saying, I think, very differently than Trump, that the United States would, I think, somewhat. I think he made it clear, but maybe not as clear as we hoped, that Russia would be more of an adversary and distinguishes from China as a competitor, but that the United States would work with allies, competitors, and adversaries because we're facing existential crises, and he included in this the pandemic, but also climate control. Yeah. And I think these are areas of substantial overlap that Washington can cooperate with Beijing on, as well as reform of multilateral organizations, economic recovery, and I think even security issues.
Professor Yuan, there has been several issues being mentioned several times, you know, about the climate change, about the fight against the pandemic, also about the economic recovery. That was pointed out by the Chinese Foreign Minister, State Councilor Wang Yi, many months ago, and then that was also reiterated in a stronger way by Mr. Yang Jiechi, China's top diplomat. And now we did hear some kinds of different tones of echoing from the new administration in the United States about climate change, for example. President Biden did mention about there are things that China-U.S. can do together as long as it is in the interests of the United States. So, Professor Yuan, how should we interpret this? Is there a way to approach this from a positive side and bring some lower hanging fruits, sir? Sorry for my long question, but you know I really have to set the stage for you, sir.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about the relations because Joe Biden's new administration do provide some window of opportunity for the relations. But this window maybe is not so big. Maybe the opportunity is not so long. How to seize this opportunity to restart the relations? I use several R's. Maybe the first R is a review. Both sides should review the relations, what has been going on, what should be moving ahead, make a right conclusion to be the precondition to moving ahead. And second R, I think, is a reaffirm from the American side, should reaffirm one vital interest of China, that is Taiwan issue, one China policy, which is deeply hurt by Donald Trump administration. And the third R, I think, maybe is a reassurance. Reassurance that both sides should no war, no Cold War, no decoupling, no stopping people-to-people exchanges. Those bottom line, both sides need to reassurance. And also several, for example, relief the pandemic, COVID-19. This is our common interest. Both sides can work together bilaterally or under WHO framework, and the resumption different types of dialogues, which is very important for the two big powers to the new start of the relations. And we have so many renegotiation the trade and restart the relations, and most importantly, reshape the framework, redefinition of the nature of the relations. Don't use adversary enemy sort of term, but find some, for example, stakeholder sort of wording to give a very neutral nature of the relations so that we can moving ahead.
Is the Chinese side, Professor Yuan, you are a very well-known expert here in China about China-U.S. relations. Is the China side also proactively trying to do some of the things you just mentioned, all of these vocabularies that you have been tapping into briefly?
Yes, we are waiting for China always the part to improve the relations. Just like Director Yang Jiechi mentioned, in the past 4 years, it's Donald Trump who made the relations bad, and China always want to improve the relations. So the door always open, and the card is in American side. Also, China can play a very positive role in leading, in shaping the relations.
Okay.
So I think the relations based on the bilateral cooperation.
All right. Well, Professor Laris, I know you've been listening to your colleagues attentively. The door is open. The window is not necessarily going to have a huge opportunity, but there is opportunity. Will the new administration be able to grasp it politically?
Yeah, I would agree with what has been said. There is an opportunity, and the use of the word competitor rather than the word adversary means something positive. Biden wants to engage, particularly, of course, on climate change, but there are also other areas where cooperation with China is possible. For example, in the World Trade Organization, to reform that organization, in the World Health Organization, maybe even on counterterrorism. And I think Biden is serious about that. He wants to engage, if at all possible. But of course, he also realizes there are areas of conflict: market access, intellectual property, South China Sea, human rights, Xinjiang, and so on. And I think he knows that. But I think he has an open mind, and he will grasp the opportunity. Having said that, Biden didn't actually say that much about China in his speech, and I understand there is a review going on in the State Department, in the White House. So I think there will be another major speech by Biden in a few weeks' time, perhaps maybe in a month or two, where he will say something much more focused on China and the relationship with China, because he knows the world is really dominated by two great powers, and that is China and, of course, the United States, and they need to coexist. Okay. Whatever people say about war and conflict, but both sides realize they have no choice but to coexist, and Biden is fully aware of that.
All right, Professor Mahoney, your thoughts about rhetorics, Washington rhetorics. We've heard that so much over the past 4 years, vis-a-vis pragmatism, a word that you use that really took note. What about that this time, China-U.S. relations?
Well, again, I think that we can look at how Biden has already responded with respect to the New START treaty, the acknowledgement that he has to cooperate with both adversaries and competitors. I agree that it's a sharp change in the discourse from his predecessor, not just in terms of action, but also in terms of language. I think that, you know, if we look at one of the issues that he talked about in the speech, and that the White House has been responding to quite a bit in Myanmar, that we see this troubled approach of principal pragmatism. On the one hand, you know, there's the criticism of the military for the coup, but on the other hand, there's not really a substantive response. It's really only been a rhetorical response. And to be frank, you know, the coup shouldn't have been that surprising, but at the same time, the IMF released hundreds of millions of dollars in aid with the coup as a possibility, at least among the experts who were watching.
So what's your point, sir?
You know, I think principal pragmatism. My point is that principal pragmatism is something that leans more in the direction of pragmatism and realism in politics, and doesn't always put principles first. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be really befuddling people as we move forward.
Very interesting. Professor Yuan, I want to come back to the talk about China-U.S. because this is what many people are watching today's program for. You know, building upon what just happened, with the review going on in Washington, China, I'm sure, is also looking very closely about how to have its new plan toward Washington, and just the plan, and, you know, this tangle between the two countries. What are some of the barometers we should watch from now on? Let's just say over the past month or two, Professor. Professor Yuan.
Oh, for me, sorry.
Yes.
I think, yes, the whole world is closely watching what's going on in U.S. and China relations, because now the relations is so bad that that both sides want to back to normal. But how to back to the new normal, I think need both sides to think some new way to achieve. I think one possible way is that the jointly cooperation in combating the pandemic, COVID-19, because this is the first priority for Joe Biden. And also, without the American relief of the pandemic, China cannot feel safe. Even our situation much better.
Right.
So we are in the same boat, and the world is looking forward the two big powers to cooperate, and need the whole world out of the bad situation, and also I think the economic recovery. And the problem is that if Americans still view China as an adversary or competitor, and look the alliances first, and use alliances as a tool to deal with those competitor or rivalry, I think it's a very indirect way. Americans need to directly managing the relations with China, and China's door is open. I think this is very important.
Very interesting point there. Just to inform everyone, earlier I had a talk with China CDC Director, Disease Control Center Director. He told me that he congratulated his a new American counterpart, that they had email exchanges, and they both agreed that they need to work together in order to have a safer world. That's an exact quote I could have from him. So there's a lot of things that are going on actually as we speak, gentlemen. It's very exciting. Having said that, though, my last quote that we can watch right now, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo demolished this time President Biden's America is Back diplomatic strategy, saying he doesn't think the American people can afford to go back. But most of the comments on Twitter are actually wary of the previous administration's policy. If you take a look at the screen, you will see some of the response coming from the actually netizens. It's quite an interesting contrast and what people's wishes are. Obviously, they hope to have better life with political stability. I want to wrap it up with that kind of note. Hopefully, we will be learning from the mistakes and moving forward. for a better future. Thank you so much, the three of you gentlemen, for joining us. Klaus Laris, Joseph Gregory Mahoney, last but not least, Yuan Peng. Really appreciate it. Be safe and have a great weekend. Thank you. Thank you, sir. And you're watching World Insight. Still to come in our program. Double whammy for global business, a crushing pandemic and contentious China-U.S. relations. Hope for the best, but how are they preparing for the worst? Words of wisdom from the chairman of a prominent consulting firm, PwC. Right next.